Welcome to An Electric Revolution. I'm your host, Henry Sanderson. In the last episode, we talked about Charles Brush, an American inventor who built a wind turbine in 1888, but he never patented the turbine nor attempted to manufacture it. In this episode, we will talk about Poul la Cour, who is known as the Danish Edison. After quitting his career in Copenhagen as a meteorologist, he moved to teach at a rural school, where he built a wind turbine in 1891, 4 years after Brush. I'm delighted to have Jytte Thorndahl to talk about la Cour's life. She was previously a curator at the Danish Museum of Energy. Unlike Brush, Poul la Cour built a wind tunnel to study how best to build a wind turbine to generate electricity. He worked out that fewer and longer wind turbine blades would generate more electricity. He also developed a method to convert the variable speed of the wind into a constant rotational speed for the electrical generator. He also stored energy by using electricity generated by his wind turbine to create hydrogen. This was successful, albeit there was the occasional hydrogen gas explosion. He also spread his knowledge to others, establishing the Danish Wind Electricity Society to teach electricians. As a result, la Cour sowed the seeds for Denmark's domination of the global wind industry in the 20th century. Well, hi, Jytte. Thanks so much for joining me to talk about the life of Poul la Cour. Fascinating life. He's known as the Danish Edison. I wonder if you could tell me a bit about what we know of his early life.
Well, his early life, he was born in Denmark, but with ancestors going back to France. But his family had been in Denmark for quite some time. He grew up on a farm in Djursland, a part of Jutland, and he went to school and he found out that he was actually rather good in maths and physics. Not so good in other subjects, but he managed to become a student, and he went to Copenhagen, lived with elder brother and got a degree in physics, and he also studied climate or climatology, which was rather new at that time. But actually he is a physicist. But during his studies, he did analysis and investigations over the weather, because to forecast the weather would be very good for the Navy, for ships, for farmers. And it was quite a new study that has started also several places in Copenhagen. And he managed to be an assistant of the first Danish Meteorological Institute. And he was very keen on getting the message out fast and quick. And for that problem, the telegraph system could only get one set of information at a time. So actually he started an invention in a telegraph that could pass on information 12 by the same time. It was something quite new, and he tried to get it patented in the United States, but there were all kind of problems, and it didn't work out, and he never got the American patent for his 12-quadruple telegraph. But it was used in France and other places in Europe and in Denmark. And at the same time, he was this assistant at the Meteorological Institute. And he was quite worn out from all this work with investigations. And his wife suggested that he should take on another job. In Denmark at that time, we had started schools for adults, people who had only been to school maybe 5 or 7 years. And it was a high school for farmers, for people like blacksmiths, carpenters, and they could have winter studies or summer studies at a high school. Of course, there was a price to be paid, but in general, they have been teaching Danish, German, Danish history, religion, and one of the headmasters of school would like also to give people an opportunity to study physics and mathematics, because that part had not been really into the high school systems. And Poul la Cour started then as a teacher in physics and mathematics and, well, history of mathematics and history of technology at Askov High School.
1878, right? He moved to the country.
Yeah.
Quite a big move for him to.
It was quite a big move, and he got, well, it was like working as an inventor at this institute with his 12 double telegraph system. It was quite a change. And he started up teaching at the high school, and there were a lot of farmers at that time who also went to the high school, and he had an idea that he would like to do some kind of an invention that could help the farmers in their daily work. And in 1891, we had the first official electric power plant in Denmark. But it was in Odense, and a year later in Copenhagen, and it was all centered around the cities in Denmark, because it was a direct current, and so it would never reach out into the countryside. So the only thing could be if you could have a machine that could make electricity in the countryside. And Poul la Cour applied and got money to build a first wind turbine at the high school. And the idea was from the beginning that the electricity was going to be used for making hydrogen. You can make hydrogen if you have electricity and water, because you can split the water into oxygen and hydrogen. And that was because the batteries, the elements, were very expensive also. So hydrogen was the first idea. And he managed to get some money from the Danish state and built the first wind turbine at Askov High School and started producing hydrogen. He went to Italy to buy some machines that could separate water into oxygen and hydrogen, and he improved also these machines. And he managed to have the hydrogen and have a big tank full of hydrogen, and which later we have found in the place in Askov where he had his wind turbine. And first he implemented, or he used the hydrogen for lighting up his own house, which was next to the place where the turbine was standing. And 2 years later, the high school was several rooms, the big rooms for lectures and eating, dining room at the high school, were lit also by hydrogen. And he tried several gas motors at the workshop, but it was really hard to make them work with the hydrogen. And we also know from the accounts that several times windows were broken and they had to put new glass into the workshop. And more people asked Poul la Cour, is it possible can we get a wind turbine, a windmill that can produce electricity? And for that, he asked for money and he started doing experiments with blades and how should an ideal wind turbine look like if it's going to produce electricity. He was the first person in Denmark to do that. And he got money for a bigger turbine. And he also made a workshop where he could test different kind of blades. How many blades should there be? How should they be designed? Should they be just straight, or should they have a curve? Should they be curved? And he found out that you shouldn't put on too many blades. 4 would be ideal, and that was also the carpenters at that time. They could easily make a 4-blade wind turbine. And he was the first to discover that the curved blade of a wind turbine was much better than a flat one. So he understood the efficiency of the curve that would make it turn around faster. He could see from his test that this was the whole idea. And this is a kind of a new analysis, or it's quite new into the findings of wind turbines, because it had always been thought that it was the pressure of the wind into the blade that gave the effect of the wind turbine, and it was not so much the curve, so what happened at the backside of the wing that mattered. And he actually started an organization of small electrical power plants, and an engineer was there to take care of all kind of, what do you call them, people, farmers, factory owners who would ask if he could help them build a small electric power plant with wind turbine or with steam engine. And for this worked also along the high school. It was not part of the high school, but the center was at La Cour's place where they had the wind turbines. And also they had changed from hydrogen now to electricity. So I think it's since 1905, the power plant was the little town of Askov. It was their first electric power plant, providing electricity, most of all light to the town, and maybe electricity for some electric motors on farms. And it spread it really spread very, very fast.
So he really helped electrify rural.
He really helped electrifying rural Denmark, making all these small power plants. From 1904, he also set up classes for rural electricians. So there's a need of electricians in Denmark. To become an electrician, you would have to find another electrician, and you would have in several places to pay an amount of money to learn how to be an electrician. But he started these classes for rural electricians, and they were called the Askov Boys, and they had some problems with unions because in several places they were cheaper in performing their work in building up these small power plants. And they worked not only in the rural areas, but also in some smaller towns around, setting up small power plants.
So at the time, the central electricity grid hadn't really come to rural.
It had not come, no. Well, we got the first alternate current plant in 1907 in Denmark. It was north of Zealand, north of Copenhagen. And of course it spread, but they stuck to the Edison idea of direct current in Denmark for several years. So it was a matter of the bigger towns having electricity. But eventually also they started taking the wires out into the countryside and changed into alternate current.
But he also invented a way to keep the motion at a constant rotational speed, right? The cratostat was his invention.
Well, he's known today for this 12-quarter telegraph. But I think more important is that he's known for the start of wind power in Denmark. He was the first one to officially also use it for hydrogen. Which it's a big issue today with all this green movement and having, yeah.
Do you think Poul la Cour is the reason Denmark was so successful in the wind industry?
Not only, but one of his students, he attended the first class of rural electricians in 1904. His name is Johannes Juel. And he's the father of the Gesser wind turbine, which was a very successful wind turbine that was set up in 1957. After the Second World War, people were worried, how could we make electricity in the future? Oil is a scarce resource. We don't know how long coal will last, and we have to think of alternative ways of making electricity. And it was a very successful wind turbine. We have it at the museum. I'm now retired, but still working as a volunteer at the museum, and I managed to bring it, not the whole tower, but the nacelle and wings are at my museum, the Museum of Energy at the Danish in Jutland. Yeah.
But what was his vision, Poul la Cour's vision for wind electricity? Why did he want to develop?
Yeah, he wanted to help farmers. He wanted to assist and to improve their way of life. It would be much easier working, hauling water, making all kind of grinding corn and so on, harvesting, if you could use electricity. Or in the beginning, he thought of hydrogen, but it turned out it was electricity.
But at that time, Denmark imported coal, right? So it relied on.
We have no coal in Denmark. A tiny little bit of coal has been found on the island of Bornholm, but we have no coal in Denmark. So we have brown coal. If you know what that is, it's a beginning of coal, but in the moors we could dig it. Yeah.
After Poul la Cour, for how many years were wind turbines used in rural areas of Denmark?
Oh, they were used quite a long time. We had more than 3,000 wind turbines. Denmark is a small country, and it was really used in the countryside. For some places just for hauling water, other places also for electricity. We had lots of wind turbines in Denmark following Poul la Cour. So they were used during especially First World War and also during Second World War. They started making more modern turbines with 2 or 3 wings. It's been an issue in Denmark. But, well, oil was very cheap to buy. So after Second World War, it was only this test windmill at Gesser by Johannes Juel that came. But it was still standing when we had the energy crisis in the 1970s. And it was put to work again. They restored it and put it to work again because it seemed to be one of the only big wind turbines in the world that had worked for more than 10 years and without ruining itself.
So it's really also the First World War, the Second World War. Denmark, I guess, found it harder to import fossil fuels, so wind had an opportunity.
Yes, wind had an opportunity. We're surrounded by quite many meters of coast, and we have wind blowing in from east and sometimes, mostly from west, but sometimes also from the east. And there's a lot of opportunities, and especially when they found out that it was possible to set them up offshore at sea. I mean, the wind is blowing really very much there. Denmark was also the first country to have an offshore wind park of wind turbines.
Fascinating. So do you think Poul la Cour is the father of the modern wind turbine?
He's definitely part of it because he inspired Johannes Juel, which was one of his students. But I think Johannes Juel is more likely the father, but Poul la Cour was an inspiration for many people.
And one of his key legacies is the wind tunnel that he built, right? And experimenting.
He experimented with a wind tunnel, and his student, Johannes Juel, did exactly the same after the Second World War. He managed, he was an engineer working with an electricity company, but he had the permission to do experiments that would benefit the electricity company. And he set up also a wind tunnel to test different types of blades to find the best ones to use.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating to hear the history. Thank you. Thank you for listening to An Electric Revolution. For the next episode, we'll have a story about how an early solar power pioneer was kidnapped. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe to get all future episodes. Thank you.